Welcome back, everybody, once again to the Complete Free Flutter course presented by yours truly, Ovidus Mansuru. So first of all, I do need to apologize for my absence. As I mentioned to you guys last time, I did start a new position, so I'm a bit more busy than I was previously. And I just have a lot of things I need to study to really get myself to a level I want to be, because there's, I want to be the best at these things. And that goes beyond Flutter, it goes into architecture and a lot of other topics as well, which I'm reading up on, studying up on, and so on and so forth. But as I mentioned last time, I am absolutely committed. Yes, I am committed to getting these tutorials out there so that you guys have access to them. Now, I think this week I'm going to have a bit more time than I did last week. So I'm going to try to record as many of them as I can and get them being released once a day. But I cannot make any promises so far. But leaving that aside, so where were we? Last time we looked at our bottom navbar and we looked at moving the state from outside of the navbar itself and into a separate widget. And we called it, I believe it was this one, navbar state. And we also used a navbar inherited widget. And this works perfectly fine. It does. We could use this and there's no real issue with it, except for the fact that there's quite a lot of boilerplates. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, when we talk about boilerplate, what we mean is all of this code that we need to kind of repeat and reuse, but we can't quite copy and paste it because it's just a tiny bit different every time. Something like having these two different classes would count as boilerplates, and it might just feel a tiny bit awkward to do something like this, which is why there are all kinds of packages to help us. But I did want to go over inherited widget first, because this is what's happening under the hood for a lot of the classes which we can use, or a lot of the state management solutions we can use. And today we're going to abstract a little bit away from the inherited widgets and use the first package for state management, which I should have open here, which is going to be the provider package over here. So currently we're on 4.3.2 plus 1, but the same basic ideas will hold true no matter which version you guys are on. It should be the same in the future, but just a couple of things might be a tiny bit different. So this provider package, and let me see if I can find where it says it, it's a wrapper around inherited widget. So that means under the hood, here it is, a common way to consume inherited widgets. So it really is just inherited widget, but it's done in a way where it looks a bit better, where we don't need to complicate things as much, and it just flows a lot more naturally. And in fact, Google and the Flutter team officially endorses Provider. Sorry, my phone just beeps because I heard me say Google and then I dropped it when I tried to turn it off. But putting that aside, I'm just going to leave it. So the Flutter team has officially endorsed Provider. Provider was a separate package created by, and I forget who, I can't say his name, it's a French name, so I'm not going to try. In fact, it's even recommended by the Flutter team. If you go to flutter.dev under simple app state management, they give a detailed breakdown on how to use Provider. And the important thing that we're going to look at right now is this part. So what they mention is that with Provider, you need to understand three concepts: ChangeNotifier, ChangeNotifier Provider, and Consumer. And we'll go over these really briefly first, and then we'll go into actually make something using this. So ChangeNotifier, it's a class. It's a class which we can extend. And what this gives us is the ability to listen to changes. So when we have a change notifier, other classes, other variables can actually listen to those changes and react to them changing. Then we have the change notifier provider, which it's another widget. The same way how in our, I think this is the correct one. I forget exactly where we had it. We had to wrap our material app with a navbar state. We had to wrap it in some kind of widget. Well, we also do that with Provider, and we wrap it with what we call change notifier providers. So that's just the wrapping widget we have. And finally, the consumer. The consumer it's another widget, but more similar to, let me see if I can find where we used it. I can't find exactly where we used it right now. It's somewhere, somewhere on this page. Okay, I'm going to leave that aside because I can't find exactly where we used it. But the consumer is what we use exactly in the location we want to listen to the to whatever variable we're listening to. So of course, with something like the ChangeNotifier provider, this would normally go in a much higher location, for example, in the main.dart or in some kind of higher level widget, whereas the consumer is something that we would put much lower down, and it's something we would repeat. For example, in my bottom navbar state, if I also needed it in my stopwatch screen, I'd put a different one in my stopwatch screen, but the ChangeNotifier provider would only be used once in the lowest level, which is high enough to cover all my use cases, if that makes sense. Do you remember that graph I showed you guys last time of how we can raise the state? Well, we don't want to raise it too far. We don't want to always put it in main.dart, because if we always put it in main.dart, then everything's going to be rebuilt. So we do kind of need to balance it out. Have it as low as possible, but it's still high enough to cover everything. But again, this will make much more sense when we go into our examples. So we're going to start with the ChangeNotifier. So the ChangeNotifier, as I mentioned, is the replacements for these two, the navbar states and the navbar inherited widget. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a separate state for my stopwatch screen. Now there is a discussion to be had here, because in this particular case, my stopwatch screen state provider is only going to be used in the stopwatch screen. So you could make an argument for not using any state management solution and simply using a stateful widget. And, you know, that would be an argument. You could say you want to do that, but somebody else, myself actually, I would argue that that's not good design, because I'm a big proponent of separating our logic from our UI. So personally, I think that your stopwatch screen itself should only contain the logic, the UI itself, only the things you can see, and all those functions and other things should be separate. So personally, I do believe we should separate these, even if we're only using the states in a single screen like what we're doing here. But leaving that discussion aside, so we're going to go into my states here, and of course we could create a new folder for all the different types of states, but I'm not going to. We can right click and new file, and I'm going to call this stopwatch. I could call it stopwatch state, stopwatch provider. I'm going to call it stopwatch provider.dart. Of course, the name is not that important. One of the big reasons I'm calling it provider rather than state is simply that when we refer back to it at the end, you can see where the inherited widget is, you can see where the provider is, you can see where getX is. By the way, getX is what we'll talk about next time. And yeah, so that's going to be great. Okay, so we're going to have a class and call it whatever we want, in this case, stopwatch provider. And then we're going to extend the ChangeNotifier. And notice that auto imported Flutter Cupertino, which is not the one I want. In fact, what I want to do is import provider, and it has just struck me that I haven't added this to my pubspec.yaml, so we need to do that. So I'm going to find pubspec.yaml here, and I don't have main dependencies yet, but we're going to add one. So Control-Shift-P to open up this menu here, and I'm going to hit pubspec assist, and here I'm going to just type in provider. So if you guys, and I'm just going to choose the first one here, provider, and what that's going to do is add it for me automatically here in the bottom. If you guys don't have that pubspec assist, I'd highly recommend getting it. Go into your extensions, type pubspec assist, and you should find it. It's this one here. I'm not going to try to say his name because I know I'm going to say it badly, but you can see the one it is. Go ahead and install this, and it's going to make adding new dependencies very easy. So I'm going to save this, And when I save this, you'll see this over here. So it's just downloading the new package, in this case Provider. And now I can close it and go back here. So now that I have this, I might have to restart VS Code, but let's try not doing it. And let's try Provider. Okay, cool. I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. Provider/provider.dart. And again, there's a good chance I'm going to have to restart VS Code. Yeah. So I'm going to restart this. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. You can see that there is an update, but I'll get to that later. And you can see that now that I've restarted VS Code, it's aware of the extra package that I added. So now rather than being a red underline, it's a blue underline, which is fine. ChangeNotifier, it might actually still require me to... Okay, so actually I just remembered stopwatch provider should not be extending, we should be using with. So with ChangeNotifier, and now it also wants me to import something. I'm going to import material. And now that we have this, similar to what we were doing here, we can, or in these two, we can keep our state separate from everything else. So I'm just going to get rid of these because I don't want too many things getting in our way. But yeah, so we can keep whatever state we're listening to here. And one thing I've seen a lot of people do when it comes to timers, stopwatches, and that kind of stuff is I've seen people try to do some kind of loop, something like void increment timer, and then having some kind of timer and say something like timer.periodic, periodic duration seconds 1, and this isn't pseudocode this is pseudocode, by the way. This won't run. And then say something like print new time. And if you had something like this, which if you had something like this, and I just imported Dart async, we are going to need it afterwards, even though I'm not going to use exactly this. The reason this won't work, and that's right, it will not work, is because of the event loop. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail right now, but essentially Dart and most programming languages really are asynchronous. It's not concurrent. That means it cannot do two things at the same time. So when I do something like this, what I'm actually doing is telling Dart to run whatever function I have here after a delay of 1 second. However, Dart can only do one thing at a time. So when that second comes, if Dart is doing something, it's not going to just drop whatever it's doing and jump to this function. Instead, this function is going to get added to what we call the event loop, and it's going to be run as soon as Dart has a chance to do it. So as a result, if we do this, our 1 second is not actually guaranteed to be exactly 1 second. Now, if you're just doing this a couple times, you're not really going to notice the difference. But if we do something like this for a timer, then very quickly you're going to notice that your timer falls out of sync. So this is definitely one pitfall. It's the first time I ever made a timer. I definitely did it this way using JavaScript, and it didn't work, and I couldn't figure out why. Now that I know a bit more, I know why. But we're going to do it a different way. One good way, what I did when I was using JavaScript, was just recording the time. But Dart has another class, another tool, which is going to make this much easier for us, and that is the stopwatch class. So I'm going to use stopwatch, and I can't remember if I have to import it or not. No, maybe not. Stopwatch SW equals stopwatch. And of course, you guys will remember what this means is we're creating a new class, a new instance of class stopwatch. And I actually want to show you guys, if we go into the code of stopwatch, when we do void start, what this does is this calls _now, and _now, okay, it doesn't want to show me right now. I can't remember exactly how I got to it last time, but _now is actually recording exactly what I said I did in JavaScript. It's recording the exact time, the exact date time that we start doing that. And then when we stop the stopwatch, let me see if I can find the stop. Okay, here it is. When we stop the stopwatch, then it records the difference between the starting time and the stop time. So in other words, it does exactly what I want to do in JavaScript. So as a result, this is safe to use because it's actually recording the time that we're starting and stopping rather than just running a periodic loop, which would not work correctly. But okay, I went into more detail than I thought I was going to. So we have our stopwatch here, and then we need some kind of functions or some kind of way to get our data. So let's start with a void start. This makes sense. And what my start's going to do is simply going to take my stopwatch and start it. And this, of course, being the stopwatch class I created. Then we have a void stop. In fact, I'm going to call it void pause. And for void pause, but I'm sorry if you can hear some kind of noise, there's some kind of airplane or something outside. Very loud airplane. But anyway, stopwatch.stop here for my void pause. I can also use void unpause, which is going to start it again. And in fact, I'll say if stopwatch dot is running, then we're going to do stopwatch.start. And if the stopwatch is not running, we won't do anything. And you might be wondering how I know to use .start, .stop, .is running, and all these other functions from the stopwatch class. Well, you just check the documentation. I have, of course, worked with this before, so that's why I already know which methods to use. But if you didn't know, you could just type in Flutter stopwatch, and so this is going to take you straight to the stopwatch class. You can see a lot of the things it has. It has an elapsed property, elapsed in microseconds, milliseconds, elapsed ticks, frequency, is running, and then a few different methods, reset, start, stop, and so on. So most of the ones which we're going to use. I'm also going to have a void reset. I'm just going to do void sw.reset. Okay, so this is the stopwatch. Then we're gonna need a string starting string. Let's just call it return string. I'm really bad with names. And I'm actually gonna have to give it a default value. So kind of what I want to display when it first starts. And you'll understand why we're doing that a bit later. Or in fact, you know what, I am not going to do this, so you can see the error and understand why in that way instead. Okay, and then let's do a string underscore build return string. Why am I using the underscore here? Because I don't want anything outside of this class to access it. I just want my different classes to interact with my return string itself. And in fact, what I'm going to do is give both of these underscores, and same here. And instead, I'm going to use a getter string get time, I'll call it, and that's just going to return the return string. Sorry, my work computer is a Mac, so now I'm used to different shortcuts. Now my fingers are a bit confused. Yeah, so here we were. We're going to build a return string. So what do I want? So this will build an appropriate return string for a stopwatch in the format HH, MM, and I'll use capitals, HH, MM, SS, or in other words, something like 01, 23, 45, like that. And you might remember this from some videos a long time ago. We worked with how to build this kind of string, so I'm not going to go over all the details. Now there is something to be said here for how readable I want it to be or how concise I want it to be. It is trade-off. I'm just going to do it like, I'll say if underscore sw.elapsed dot in hours. So that elapsed property has a few different versions. And again, this is why I love VS Code, because it's really going to help you out here. When you press dots, you have a few different things to choose from. I'm going to choose in hours. And if that's greater than or equal to 1, then we're going to do something. Else, we're going to do something different. And what I want to do here is, well, actually display the hours, because if I don't have any hours, I don't want it to say 00. I'd rather just say 25 or whatever it is over there. So we're going to say here, then I don't know if I want an intermediary string. You know what, I'm going to put 1, and maybe later I'm going to have to get rid of it. str, and I'm going to have a starting value of null of empty string, str plus equals. I'm going to do brackets here, and here we're going to have underscore sw elapsed dot in hours. I do want this 0 here as well, so we're going to say greater than 9, and the question mark, that makes this a ternary operator. So this is an if statement. Now, if sw.elapsed.inHours is greater than 9, then I want underscore sw dot, and actually should be the other way around, less than 10. Then I want it to say 0 followed by underscore sw. No, actually that's fine. I can just leave it like this. And then here I can do another $sign with open and close curly braces, sw.elapsed dot in hours. So what this is going to do, this is going to say if I need the 0, if it's less than 10, then give me that 0. Otherwise, just give me an empty string, and others don't do anything. And then afterwards, put this variable over there. And if we're not doing that, then, well, we don't need this. And in fact, I'm just going to leave this out because I'm not going to use an else. What I'm going to do instead is make another function inside my build return string just to make things look a bit better. I'm going to call this build seconds. And keep in mind, I'm only using it exactly here. I'm not going to use it anywhere else. And this will also be a string. And what this is going to do is it's going to return just the correct amount of seconds. So I'll say if dot elapsed dot in seconds greater than 9, then return. And what am I using here? Then we're going to return $, open and close curly brackets, underscore sw dot elapsed dot in seconds, and that's going to be modulo 60. So remember, because my in seconds, my total seconds can be a really big number, but I only want to have the remainder when doing modulo 60, because I don't want, I don't want something ridiculous like 1,000 seconds, right? That wouldn't make sense. And if it's not the case, then we're going to return, return 0 followed by $_ and the same exact thing here. And in fact, maybe we could do this as a ternary instead. So we could say return like this, dot in seconds. I'm not used to speaking while I code anymore. Like this. And then do this one. And otherwise, we're gonna do this one. I'm gonna get rid of that. That's fine. So this is the build seconds, and then I'm gonna have a string build minutes. So again, you can see that there's another function inside of this function, so I'm not going to use it anywhere else. What I'm going to do here is return, so similar thing to before, sw.lapse.in minutes greater than 9, and we're going to, so if it's greater than 9, I do not need that, I don't need the I'm thinking about two different things. If it's greater than 9, I don't need the leading 0, so I can just do sw.elapsed.in minutes, and again I'm going to have to do that modulo 60 to get my correct time, and then I'm going to do the colon because I need my seconds after this, and now I'm going to do my $_ with my open and close curly brackets and do build seconds, and use those open and close brackets to run the function straight away. Otherwise, I'm going to copy this, and I'm just going to add a 0 over here, and then put my semicolon at the end over there. And of course, if you wanted to, you can make this as 2 lines to have an intermediate return string here, or something like that. Whatever you think is the most readable. Personally, I want to do it this way, but if you feel you want to do it a different way, go ahead and do it a different way. There's no reason for you to do it exactly the way I'm doing it. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to say str plus equals, or I'll just say, to make it more clear, I'm just going to say str equals str plus build minutes here. And why am I doing this is because, so these two are functions, they're not running automatically. I have a starting value of empty string here, then over here I'm building the, if I need the hours, I'm building that, but if not, I'm not doing anything. And then so here, this might be holding the hours if needed, but if not, it's an empty string. And then I'm just setting that to whatever it is, plus the thing here. And then I'm just going to return str. There we go. So build return string right here is going to get me the correct string that I need. Okay, so we have this, we have the different controls. And then I mentioned earlier that we will still need some kind of loop, because when I call this function, it's going to build, it's going to build that correct string, but then I need some kind of way of calling it again and again and again. And the way I'm going to do that is similar to what I showed you before. I'm going to make a timer t, and then I'm going to make a void, let's call it update stopwatch string. What this is going to do is going to say timer.periodic, so like we did before, and this is going to take a duration, and I'm going to give it a duration of seconds 1, And then this takes a timer, and I created a timer here to use here, and put my semicolon at the end here, and then whatever I want to do. And what I'm going to do here is set my underscore return string equal to underscore build return string there. I'm going to leave that. And you might be wondering why I said we shouldn't be doing this, but I'm doing it. Well, it's about actually keeping that time, because when we do this, it's not guaranteed to be exactly 1 second. But what's going to happen here if it falls out of sync? What happens if, this doesn't do it at the correct time and it shows it as being 1 minute when in reality it's 1 minute and half a second? Well, nothing really happens because I'm still keeping track of the correct time. And then it might end up skipping a second. It might say 1 minute, then instead of 1 minute and 1 second, it'll just jump to 1 minute and 2 seconds, but it's still going to keep my correct time. Now, if I wanted to reduce the risk of that happening, I could, instead of using duration seconds, I could use duration milliseconds, like 200 or 500, to just refresh it more often, and in so doing, hopefully reduce the risk of that happening. But either way, it's not going to be that big of a deal because I'm still going to have the correct time. Whereas if you try to do this to actually calculate the time, to say something like time elapsed equals plus equals 1, something like this, then this absolutely will fall out of sync, and it will be a problem because then your consumer is going to get the wrong time. And one thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to print the return string, because there are a couple bugs in the way I've done it, and I've done it on purpose because I guarantee you when working with Provider, you will make this exact same mistake a few times, and I want you to see what that looks like and how we're going to fix it. But let's leave that aside for now. So, okay, let's say this is kind of finished. Maybe there's something else I need to do. I'll remember afterwards. So now that I have my stopwatch provider, which is what's holding my stopwatch states, now I need to, if we go back here, so we had 3 things we needed: our ChangeNotifier, and that's my stopwatch provider is using ChangeNotifier. Then I need a ChangeNotifier provider, so that's going to go, it's something similar to navbar states. Now in this particular case, the only place I'm using my stopwatch provider is going to be in my stopwatch screen. So of course I could place this, I could place it on a higher level, for example, main.dart, but that's not the correct way of doing it, quite frankly. So instead I'm going to put it inside my scaffold in my stopwatch screen. So I'm just going to control click on my sensor widget here. I'm going to wrap this with a widget, and I'm going to use ChangeNotifier provider like this. Control Shift I. Yes, I'm really used to a Mac now. All my keyboard shortcuts are incorrect. And this does not take a child. Instead, this is going to take a, I should say here, and I also need to import my provider. And this takes a create. I think it takes a child and a create. And what we're going to do in create here, let's check if it says here, it creates a ChangeNotifier, uses create, and automatically dispose it when ChangeNotifier is removed from the widget tree. So create is going to be a function, and yeah, it says it here, which takes a build context. I'm going to say context, and I'm just going to do an arrow function, and I'm going to return my stopwatch provider over here. So I have my stopwatch provider, and that's of course going to be automatically imported, and I have the open and close brackets because I'm creating a new instance of that. So by doing this, now everything that's a child, every I forget the word, every child of my ChangeNotifier provider is going to have access to my stopwatch provider. But to actually use it, I need to use the third thing here, consumer. Now there is actually a different way of using it. I don't have this exactly. It's going to be this watch, read, or select. I can also do it this way, but I don't want to overcomplicate things, so we'll just do it the old-fashioned way using consumer. So let's get rid of this. So I'm going to wrap my sensor in a new widget, and the widget I'm going to use is that consumer we mentioned before. So it's going to be consumer, and consumer has a type associated with it, and the type is going to be whatever state, whatever provider we're listening to. So in this case, it's going to be stopwatch provider, like this. And then rather than taking a child, it's going to take a builder, and the builder is going to be a function which takes, let's see if it says here, it's going to take my build context, my stopwatch provider, and my widget. Widget can be a child, but we're not going to use it currently. And then we can do something as a result of whatever we get. So that's going to be ctx for context, state, and underscore, because I'm not going to use the last one. And I'm going to put open bracket here. And let me try to match these. I believe it was here, it was not here. Here. And then I'm going to turn this comma here to a semicolon, and that's fine. So I'm not using the final widget. I do need a return statement because I'm using this as a traditional function. And the reason I'm doing it like this is because I think it would be really nice if I had a play button when it's not running, and when it is running, it set the time. So what we're going to do, we're going to forget about this for now, is I'm going to say if state dot, and now I can access different things about it. So I just realized I wanted another method, which I forgot to make. So I'm going to say bool get is running, and this is just going to return underscore sw dot is running, like this. So this is just going to tell me if my stopwatch is currently active or not. So I'm going to state dot is running. If it already is running, then I want to display whatever the time is. And if it's not, I want to print, I want to have a sensor. I want to return a sensor widget. And in my sensor widget, I'm going to use an icon. And the icon will take an icons dot play arrow. It's not this one, it's the outline, I believe. Let's try again. Play circle filled, no, outline. Yeah, so we can see it here, that's the one I want. And we're going to make it a bit bigger. Let's say size, off the top of my head, let's guess 100. And for the color, let's use theme.of context dot, let's try primary color. I can't remember if my primary color is the white or not, so maybe this is going to be incorrect, but maybe it's going to be fine. And then I'm not going to need this. And instead of my state is running, I'm going to return a sensor. And then in here, I'm going to use a text. And this is going to take bool get elapsed. Let's say, yeah, just elapsed time string. That's just going to give me my return string, and that should be a string here. I was wondering if I misspelled something. So this is going to be my state dot elapsed string, like this. And my style is going to access the theme data I had over here somewhere. So that's going to be theme.of context dot text theme dot, and I believe I was using a headline 1. Check. Yeah, that's 40, semi-bold white. Sounds good. And white was my primary color as well, so that's fine. So back here. Okay, so that was the final piece which we really needed here, which was the consumer. So by accessing my consumer, what I'm doing is I'm able to do things as a result of the state. So not only can I actually read those values, but I can also do things. So if my state is running is true, then I can do this, but I can do something else if that's not the case. And in fact, I'm going to take my icon and wrap this in another widget, and I'm going to use a gesture detector. And I can't remember if this takes on pressed or on tapped. It takes on tap. And for my on tap, I'm going to give it a state dot start. And this doesn't need the brackets here because it's just getting a reference to this function here. I'm going to add another comma here and here, format it. Okay. So what this is doing, again, when I click on this, it's going to actually run that start function, which is going to start my stopwatch, and that should get everything going. But as I mentioned, there are a couple mistakes on this. It's things which I guarantee you will end up making in your own apps. So I wanted you guys to see what it looks like when I have that bug, so that you can see why it doesn't work, see how it looks when you made this mistake, and then we'll go over how to fix it. Okay, so I've rebuilt everything. It took a few seconds, and you can see that play button the way that I wanted it to show up. Now we could argue about the size, the color, the position, all that stuff. You can change it as you want. I'm not going to right now. And now let's start looking at some of the bugs we're going to get. So I'm going to press that play button, and nothing's happened. So why is that? Well, if I go back just to my stopwatch provider, my void starts. It starts the stopwatch, but it doesn't start actually, doesn't do anything. It doesn't, aside from starting the stopwatch, it doesn't, for example, update my stopwatch string. So I'm going to here say update stopwatch string like this, save and refresh. And even when I do that, still not going to do anything because the big thing, but notice now here, we can see it working, but I'm not seeing anything different. I'm gonna restart it because I don't want this to keep going. But I didn't see anything different because my ChangeNotifier gives me the ability to listen to changes, but I need to actually tell my other widgets when an update has happened. And the way I'm going to do that is with notify listeners like this. So if you don't have this notify listeners, then none of your other widgets are going to know that something's changed. It's the same way I used set states in my previous examples to tell the UI something's changed. Now my provider or anything using ChangeNotifier, I need to use notify listeners. So now let's see what happens. I save it. Okay, and the reason it's not going to do anything this time is because I forgot to save it. But I saved it now. And when I hit play this time, it's going to crash. And the reason it's doing it here, it says data not equal to null. So it's a bit cryptic. Well, the reason is this return string. So it is being set in update SW string here, but this is running every 1 second. What about that initial value? What is the starting value? Well, here I started it on nothing, null, which is causing my app to crash. So I am going to need to give it a starting value, and I'll use 0000. And let's try once again, see what happens. And notice now it gives me the time, but again, my time isn't changing, but it is changing here. And of course, you remember from last time, the reason is I haven't used this notify listeners. So we're going to go into my update SW string, and here I'm going to use notify listeners, and let's see what happens. Still not working. So what's happening this time? Well, my update SW string is calling this timer.periodic, and every 1 second it's going to change that string. But notice where I put my notify listeners, because normally you'd put this at the end. And again, it might seem like I'm really making every mistake here, and that's absolutely on purpose, because I promise you, if you have something like this, you will end up making this kind of mistake and you're not going to understand what's happening or why it's happening or anything like that. That's exactly why I put this print statement, so we could see that it is doing something, just not quite what we expect. So in this case, because I'm updating every 1 second, that means I also need to notify my listeners every 1 second. So that belongs inside the function, not outside. And let's see if we do it now. Look at that. Our timer is working almost correctly, but I know I have a couple bugs over here. So I'm going to edit out the wait, but you can see I did make a couple mistakes when I was making this previously. Specifically, my O over here is not showing correctly. And the reason for that is because I forgot to modulo 60 over here as well. So what we're going to do is just wrap this here and do modulo 60. Because what was happening was, in the first one it was showing correctly, but afterwards when it's 61, for example, 61 is greater than 9, so it's not showing my 0, even though I do want it shown. And that means I did the same thing over here with the minutes. So I'm just gonna, that was the wrong place. So I'm also going to wrap this and do modulo 60 like this. And then that should show the string correctly. And I believe this was it for now. Yes. Okay, so obviously we haven't built all of the buttons yet. We haven't built the pause button, the reset button, all that stuff. I want to do all that stuff at the end. We're gonna do a separate video where we're gonna expand on this and make it look exactly the way we want it to look. What we're gonna do is we're also gonna show a different way of doing it for landscape and for portrait. So yeah, it's gonna be great. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are as well. But for now in this video, so that was essentially what I wanted to cover, which was the provider. So as a quick review, the provider is a state management solution. It is one which is recommended by Flutter, so you know it's going to be good. And state notifier, the provider is based on 3 things: ChangeNotifier, ChangeNotifier provider, and consumer. Our ChangeNotifier is a class which we use as a mix-in. We create our own class which represents the states, and we use with ChangeNotifier. And what that does is it gives us access to this notify listeners. And notify listeners is something similar to set states in that it tells all the children, all the widgets which are listening, that now is the time to rebuild. Now is the time that something has changed, so they need to, actually pay attention to it. So that's ChangeNotifier. And we do need to remember notify listeners. If you forget it, it will still do things, but you won't see the things being done, like what you saw previously. And also you need to make sure that you put it in the correct place, because if you have some kind of loop like this, you need to notify at the end of every loop. You cannot do it, if I did it outside, it would do it just once, and then I wouldn't get the behavior that I'm expecting. Also be a bit careful with your starting values. You will often need some kind of default starting value, because if you don't have it, then you can crash your app like what you saw previously. But that's the ChangeNotifier. After that, we had our ChangeNotifier provider. The ChangeNotifier provider is something like this. It goes as low as it can, but to still be the parent of all the widgets which need access to the states. And the ChangeNotifier provider is some kind of wrapper which, it gives all of its children access to that. And in that we can use the create, which takes a context, which we're not using here, so I could actually just use underscore, but there's no need. And here we're going to create the actual class which we're listening to, in this case stopwatch provider. There's that. And then when we actually need to do something with the values, we can use this consumer, and the consumer widget will take as a generic, inside these triangular brackets or whatever you want to call them, will take stopwatch provider or whatever type of class that we just created here. So that's this name here goes here. And then the builder will take a context, a state, and some kind of child widget. And we can then listen to the states inside of the builder and do different things in response to it. So for example, if my state is running, then I can show the time. But on the other hand, if it's not running, I can show that play button. And similarly, notice on my OnTap, I can just use state.start. And what this is going to do is access, it's going to say this state here, which is going to go up the widget tree and look for a provider or some kind of state, which is going to be this one. And then it's going to access the function from in here. Okay guys, so I know just reviewing this was kind of a mouthful. So that was Provider. I hope you guys learned a lot. In the next lesson, we're going to simplify this even further by looking at a different package called getx. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are as well. But for now, myself, Vidius, I'm out.